My name's Sasha Pete, and I'm joined by a fantastic individual. This man has not only gone back-to-back in the NPL here in Victoria, he's had a fantastic career in the NSL, none other than the great Chris Taylor. Chris, welcome to this conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So tell us, Chris, how did you fall in love with our great game?
I suppose pretty much my family. My dad played good non-league football, played at Chelsea for a year or so with the likes of Jimmy Greaves and Terry Venables in I think they called it the Metropolitan team, which is like the reserves. I know that Venables made his debut as a 16-year-old when my dad were playing, so that was his big tale. I think he was only there for a year, but then he played at clubs like Burton Albion and Tamworth and local football in Leicester before he gave it away. But that kind of got me into the game, living around the game. Every Saturday I'd, be at a game, kicking around in the mud as it was then, and in the bath with the players afterwards, as a young kid. So it kind of groomed you towards the game, and doing something similar with my son nowadays. Every Saturday we go to a game, a local game up at Langwarren or Mornington. And it's just about, getting people in love with the game, which I think the big thing is over here. I've always sort of said to people who ask you about coaching, don't pick your club, pick your coach, because the coach is the one that makes you fall in love with the game. And if you go there every week as a young kid and you love the game, you'll be in it forever.
Brilliant. And so how did you first get involved? Was it sort of school or was it club? When did you first start playing formal football as opposed to just kicking the ball with your mates on the streets?
Well, I suppose basically it was schoolboy football. And I played in some good sides as a young kid and played Leicester Beavers, which were like Leicester's youth team as such in them days, a little bit different. Fortunate enough, I think I played 5 years with Gary Lineker. We played in the same team. So,
was he good?
He's always scored goals. I think under 13s he scored something like 110 goals, but they're all sort of tap-ins in the 6-yard box. But yes, that's what his bread and butter was, and he made a good living out of the game.
Okay, I didn't know he was from the same part of England you were. So so that's an interesting claim to fame. As a 13-year-old, you and Gary Lineker. So where did you gravitate on the pitch? Where were you to feel most comfortable as a junior?
Predominantly, I played up front or midfield. The better players tended to play more centrally, so that you got on the ball all the time. As my career developed, I found little niches where you could get games with men and that. So that's why I went back to fullback. But I probably I think I came out here as a midfielder just to get the opportunity. So not that I played in midfield, but it was quite strange how things worked.
So and how old were you when you played your first senior game for a club?
I think about 17, and I think that was a big difference. I think I was playing in the reserves at a club called OD. I think a midweek game, cup game, they had an injury, and I went in, played well, kept the spot for 4 or 5 weeks, and it's quite daunting when you start playing with men. I think my dad made me go and play local football at 16, which was quite daunting. But I think it's a thing that we miss nowadays. I think we've got a youth system over here that basically goes from a 15-year-old to a 21-year-old. I've got boys coming for me, trialists at 21 who have never played a senior game. And, I think it's a big part of the game that we've overlooked, and we kid ourselves a little bit that we can technically make players better and better and better. But the game smarts and or street smarts, as I call it, is one thing that's lacking in boys coming through nowadays. I think we've done it well this year with the likes of Anthony Pantazopoulos, who's probably going to become a very good A-League player. But the fact is, from 17, he's been playing men's football. And that's a big difference. He knows how to position his body, how to manage certain situations, and it's not always about being technically successful. Sometimes it's about using your body to actually give you the upper advantage. And there are things in the game that I think we lack a little bit nowadays. But it is the system. We just have to put up with it and do the best we can.
It's interesting because I'm 45, and I think my last junior year was 16, and the natural progressions after the 16s, you tried to make the reserve team. That was just like the natural progression in our youth development, and similar to when you played football. 16s and then the reserve grade, and you could be lining up against a 35-year-old kicking you. So we got far too many teams nowadays. I totally agree with you. 15s, maybe 16s. And then you go to play with the reserves, which should be a sprinkling of older players or players coming down for fitness levels. But we've now got 18s, 20s, 21. And the list goes on. I think there's a need for actually getting people out there and playing with players that have got a little bit more experience in certain positions, And so winding back to England, when did you first sign a contract in England? Who was it for? And do you remember how much it was per week? How many pennies or pounds?
Yeah, with all the people that come out and players that have played, I probably weren't a good player. I played a lot of good non-league football, probably conference level, Southern League as it was then. But yeah, over here, coming over here, you get players that have come out of good systems. I'm still pleased with what I've done in the game and where I've got to in the game. But I've got no big stories. I've never had a trial at Man United. I never kicked a ball with, at Liverpool or played at Anfield. So, no, none of those sort of stories. But, I'll be honest with you. And it's like I say to some of my players, if you're coming out to Australia to play, you ain't successful, and that's for me, coming to Australia was like a 2-year adventure to come out, play a bit of football, see a bit of the world. And get a bit of experience from it.
So how did that engagement come about? Who did you know, or why Australia, and how did it happen?
Yeah, quite a funny story. I was playing with a lad, a very good player called Roger Bain, who's out here now. I think Roger lives down Torquay, down Surf Coast now. But I think Roger were playing at Leamington at the time. We had a couple of opportunities. One was to go to Townsville and play, and the other one, a guy called Rich Dixie who played out here, whose brother was playing at Kettering. His father came out to visit him. Went back. They put an advert in the paper. Sunshine City are after 2 players. His brother Richard, who played at Kettering, sort of said these 2 guys would be ideal, Chris and Roger. So we had the choice to go to Townsville or to go to a club called Sunshine City. And what was quite funny at the time, we picked Sunshine because we thought there'd be palm trees down the road and it'd be spectacular, beaches and stuff like that. And we ended up at Chaplin Reserve. So it was, some adventure for us.
Yeah, that's quality. So obviously at the time, being a Western Suburbs boy, Sunshine probably would have been the outskirts of the Western Suburbs of Melbourne. So, past Sunshine, there would have just been paddocks. So you would have been playing at Chaplin and just seen acres and acres and acres of just sort of, farmland or whatever. Interesting. And so Sunshine City, they were mainly Brit Scots in that side?
Yeah. I mean, there's some good players. Robbie Nelson, I think he passed away a year or so ago. So, but he was a very good player. Norrie Pate came out at the time. They had some players, the likes of Jimmy McRoberts, Wilfie Lang. They had some very, very good players. But it was a good club, a very, very sound club, and very welcoming.
And how many years before the merger with George Cross? So there was that merger happens with Sunshine George Cross and Sunshine City. How long were you playing for Sunshine City before they amalgamated those two sides?
I think it were in the second season, so it happened quite quick. And to be honest with you, it was probably, probably being in the right place at the right time. While Sunshine City was a very good club, they, as you said, they were predominantly a British club with not too many supporters. Joining up with George Cross had phenomenal support at the time, and my time there, I think I ended up having 9 seasons there, and I wouldn't change any of it. It was a very, very good club. People were very welcoming, very honourable people as well. So my times at George Cross were very, very good memories, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
It's interesting. I coach there now as one of the junior coaches, but yeah, some of the same people are still involved that were there, in the 70s. So still helping around the club. It's really a really cool experience. The sort of salt of the earth club, and they exist all around the country. But when you get the experience that you're at an authentic. People who live and breathe the game. So talk to me about, do you remember who was coaching there at the time, sort of the first years?
I think when I first came out, I think Jimmy McIntyre was coaching, and I think then we had Dave O'Connor that come. That was when it was Sunshine. I think we had Ray Pocock for a while.
Ray Pocock, yeah. So he was quality player. He also had spent time at Suburbs Pocock. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, Stevie Gore. And then it went to a transition where I was very close with Billy Wilkinson, who was a legend at George Cross. He had the team, and then they brought a guy out that probably did the most for me, a guy called Tommy Traynor.
Tommy Traynor, yeah, he's a legend at George Cross, yeah. So,
he played top level in Scotland. I think I were under him for a year, and then we had the big transition, and it's probably what kept the club in the A-League, bringing John Gardner there, and I think I had 6 or 7 years under John.
Yes.
And John was probably the reason I'm in coaching now. He had a lot of players. I think back in '85, I went and did the level 3 at Monash University. We had kids like Paul Trimboli and George Gillespie in the under-16s Vic squad that they were the guinea pigs, the coaching sessions. So it was quite a good experience. The likes of Ian Dobson were on it, Gary Cole, George McMillan, Alan Kerr. So some very, very good players. So yeah. That was because of John Gardner. He wanted players to actually start coaching as well. So I put a lot of my coaching nowadays down to having played under John Gardner.
And so talk to me. That's really interesting. The level 3s. What's that? Would that be an equivalent now to a C license or a B license? No,
that was the A license. That was
the A license. Level 3s.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So I went through the whole process fairly quick. I think Tim White was involved at the time, but I think it was a lot different then. We had the likes of Alan Best as one of the instructors, and Smithy, which was you can't get better people than that.
Ron Smith.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So he's still doing a whole heap of coach education. Yeah, probably one of the smartest minds in Australian football. So winding back to some of the George Cross times, you played in the National Soccer League. Who were some of the where did you gravitate on the pitch? Where were you playing? Was you playing in
anywhere at the back? Probably left back predominantly, but played sweeper quite a bit as well. Yeah. So different sort of game in those days, but we were very robust at the back, dare I say it. I think we'd put a few people to the sword nowadays, the likes of Sean Parton, Steve Richardson. We had some,
Sean Parton.
No nonsense players, yeah.
So the no VAR All right. So no VAR, right? Old school metal studs. I remember back when you were playing, you could still get those, those half plastic, half metal studs where the referee would touch the sole of your boot to make sure there's no sharp bits. Remember that?
My studs were actually all aluminium, but they were rugby heels. So they were probably about 25 mil long, all 6 studs.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Occasionally draw blood, those studs?
Hopefully, yeah.
So I've gone back and watched some of the tackles today, like where you would get a warning or a yellow caution. Today you'd cop 6 weeks, right? Yeah. It was okay. But the strikers would also go in equally hard as well, right? So if you dished it, you had to cop it too, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you had some decent strikers around in them days that could put it out as well, yeah.
So any elbows, broken noses, or like cut eyes during your time playing at the back?
Yeah, most of them I get, but I copped a few myself. Yeah, I mean, it's just part of the game, In them days, you gave it, but you took it as well,
But the George, that's one thing. If I remember about the sort of the early '80s George Cross, either supporting Footscray or South Melbourne, I'd have a foot in 2 camps. But being a Western Suburbs boy, we would often go to Chaplin Reserve, and you'd have 20, 30 people deep on each of the mounds around the ground.
Yeah.
Just a little cauldron, and sometimes the pitch would be so choppy and soggy that grass they're having played on that pitch as well numerous times. There'd be times that would be hard, and then other times would be really wet, and it'd be like a slush pool where you kick the ball and it would roll like 6-7 meters and just stop because it would be too heavy, the pitch. Talk to me about some of the best games or derbies that you had there at Chaplin.
Well, there were a lot of rivalry with Green Gully, George Cross. 2 Maltese clubs, so that always had a lot of spice, especially in the early days.
Yeah.
But George Cross were renowned for bringing young kids through all the time. And that made us a very, very good team at times. I think we made the finals on a couple of occasions in the National League, which was good for technically a suburban club like George Cross.
Yes.
We competed well with the big boys for a good period of time.
Yeah.
And no one liked to play us.
Yes.
The likes of Adelaide City, who were champions at the time, just didn't want to play against us. We were just that horrible Wimbledon type side that yes. just gave everything they had.
Yeah.
And obviously the support, with the Maltese people was phenomenal as well.
Yeah. So the any particular games? Did you score any goals?
No, I scored a few until we went in the National League. But I think I probably played 120, 140 games, but didn't score a goal. So yeah.
Any own goals? You remember any of those?
More than likely, but yeah, I don't put them on the wall,
Yeah, they're always horrible when you never mean it, but yeah. So that's what I found when I started playing. Start at the front and then you end up finding yourself in the back line trying to organise your team shape, and it's they get the score, but typically it's the own goal deflection that you're not supposed to have. You're talking about some of the juniors coming through. That's the one thing that, especially when were you there when they split the 2 conferences up into Northern and Southern?
Yeah.
And the one difference today, like talking about young kids getting an opportunity, George Cross literally had to blood because the wages compared to like a Marconi, South Melbourne, Adelaide City, even the bigger clubs, George Cross had to blood the youngsters. Talk to me some of the kids that came through George Cross that then went on to play for the Socceroos. Call out some names that you saw as 15, 16, 17-year-olds playing at George Cross.
Yeah, I think the first one that really came through was probably Paul Trimboli, who we got from the AIS. I think he would have been 17 at the time. Played a season. I think we're 12 games into the season, and Paul hadn't scored a goal. Okay. And but you could tell he was a good player, very clever, technically very, very good. And I think we played South Melbourne and beat them 3-0 or something like that. And Paul scored all three. Mm. I think they must have signed him before he got out of the ground for the following season. So, but that was the progression. The players had come through. Andrew Marth was another one that kind of took under my wing a little bit. Used to rip with him and that sort of thing. And he was a very good, very competitive. Who had a tremendous career, John Markowski.
Quality.
John Markowski is probably, dare I say it, probably the best player I've ever seen.
Talent-wise?
Talent-wise, yeah. At 15, he made his debut at 15 for us. And you wouldn't see something like that nowadays, but he was a man at 15, and we were having him take free kicks from 45 metres out, and strike on target. He scored some phenomenal goals, but very, very good players. And I think that was a golden period for what we had coming through. But I think the youth systems at the time were very, very good. The likes of George Karkaletsis, were there at the time. Lawrence Kidner.
Lawrence, quality, yeah. He ended up playing, believe it or not, after he played his time at Belgium at Western Suburbs. We had him. He would be next level. Imagine playing first and second division Belgium and then coming to play at state league level football. He was just like a genius on the park. Yeah.
But the youth sides at George Cross at the time were very, very good, and there were an abundance of players, but they were blooded at a very, very early age.
That's what we were talking about. Only 20 minutes ago, we were talking about that how players became football players, right? But so there's that period of 6, 8, 12, 15 games where they learn to play against men.
Right?
And it's a steep learning curve, but then they adjust, right? Yeah. So maybe that could be, the kids who are coming through today, thinking I'm playing NPL football, 14s, 15s, 16s, 18s, 21s, right? They think they're an NPL footballer because they're playing at an NPL club, right? Yep. But then couldn't get a game at a state 2 level senior game. That's the question. At what level are you as a teenager playing senior football? Could you get a game in a state 4 side, right?
Yeah.
Starting 11. That's the question. And a lot of these kids don't want to go then play, state league level football because they're an NPL player.
Yeah. It's a hard one as well. In them days, a lot of the players that used to train with the seniors, and training in them days were a bit different. It was quite competitive. Training was competitive. Used to get a bit spicy in training, for example. Whereas nowadays you see the technical side of it where your passing practice might go for 45 minutes and everything looks nice, but there's no real intensity in the training. And that's another side of the game that I think did help, because it tends to bring players through a little bit quicker and put them in situations where they have to learn from. And that's which is what a game is. But in them days, I think training was a little bit the same. It was quite up tempo, and we found some of the younger boys coming through learned a lot from the training sessions as well.
Talk to me, because George Cross wouldn't have had a lot of budget for sort of travel and accommodations. So how did you travel when you had to go interstate? And was it sort of fly in and fly out, or did you actually get a room for the night? And who'd you room?
Most of the time it was fly in, fly out. But in them days, look, you touched on it before, when they had the 2 conferences, it might be 3 teams flying to Sydney to play. So it might be Preston, George Cross and South Melbourne, for example. So you're all on the same plane, come back at the same time, all catch up in the airport, buy 40 beers at the bar, and but it was quite good and quite social in them days. Probably not as professional as what it is nowadays with recovery sessions and that sort of thing. But but it was still semi-pro as well, you know, and,
Yeah.
and you had players that were working day jobs and then played interstate. Sometimes we played cup games in the week where you'd stay overnight.
Okay.
But a bit of a challenge at times, but yeah, good learning curve as well.
And I mean, obviously, you know, you'd be marking Socceroos, right? So, you know, you'd be playing against people. I mean, it's the highest, you know, at that time, it's the highest level in the country.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there'd be people who go on to represent the Socceroos in your side, or you're marking them, right?
Yep.
So, who would you say was the you thought you lined up against, you know, and you're thinking, oh no, I've got so and so today. Who are some of the names that you had to try and lock down?
Look, I think in them days everyone had good players. You know, the likes of Steve Smith, Sean Lane, Gary Cole, and then you look at the Sydney players, the Marshall Soapers, played against Slater, Arnold. They're all good players, you know. So there's no mugs out there, and you know, people ask me, "Oh, who's the best player you've played against?" And it's a tough decision to make, but the one thing I did notice, we had some very good players come from overseas in them days, the likes of Asic at Melbourne, Croatia, or Melbourne Knights. Some really top players came out. Ajakov's probably the best player I've seen.
Žarko Ožakov, yeah, quality. I mean, he played first division in Yugoslavia. You know what 100%, I mean?
So, yeah, played for Australia. Look, he for me, long term wise, he was the best player. But the story I always tell, we played against JUST or Footscray, and they brought 3 young boys out. I think
Šekalarić brought Storšić, who played for Red Star Belgrade.
That's what I'm saying. We played against this young kid, 18, 19-year-old, very mobile. 2 years later, he was man of the match in the European Cup final. You know, that's the level of players that you played against in them days, and some player he was, yeah.
Yeah, I think his name was Storšić. He played.
Yeah, he played in Spain most of his life, but yeah, I can't remember his first name, but Stosic his name, right?
Yeah. Quality. It's interesting that you think, oh yeah, I played against him at like Schindler Reserve or Chaplin Reserve, and then you're watching him on TV when Red Star won the European Cup final. I think it was 1990 or 91. Yes. The Cup final. Yeah. So interesting. I think they're one and only European Cup final. Interesting. Some good overseas players. And so, did you play at left back or right back? Because you would have marked a couple of quick players, like at the time, like Zdravko Luic. You coached his son Miloš.
Yeah. Luic was the top player. One of the better players around. The other one that was really quick in them days was Manus Lemon.
Oh,
it was electric. Frank Farina. He was quick.
Talking about fast players. You'd have to, Chris, you'd have to throw the elbow to make sure pull the shirt on those players.
They were sharpened up. Don't worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. So we're now. So and you had some. So another Western Suburbs boy, Tyrone James, played in that George Cross side as well. So Tyrone came from England. And come to another English lad to so you had some company there in George Cross, another Englishman.
Yeah, well, there's a few. Donny McLaren, Jamie's father, was one of our mainstays in midfield as well. So we had some real good boys down there. It was, like I say, it was an enjoyable time to play football, and we had a great dressing room, so it was fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant. So and now we're transitioning out. So did you know when you were playing that you thought, okay, I've got views on the game, or I think I'd like to learn or stay in the game by coaching? Did you have an inkling towards the end of your career that you might want to be a manager?
No, look, it was a strange one. I had a bit of a hip injury about 30, 31, and I gave the game away. And I were out the game for a year, and I thought, no, I wasn't really missing it. But then I got convinced to go and coach Sunbury in Division 2. And I coached them for 2 years. I think that was 92 and 93, something like that. and then from that, Green Gully picked me up in the VPL, MPL, whatever you want to call it, and that's probably where I've coached ever since. So from '94 through to today, so a fair number of years. I think at the time Charlie Ferrugia was at Green Gully, and he gave me the opportunity, and forever grateful for that, because still going around today.
That's brilliant. I mean, and not a bad club to join too. You know, always stable. They had the Pokies there at Green Gully, always to have.
I was there before the Poke. Well,
were you? Okay, so you would have had
to. When I was there, so I never had the luxury of having the financial dot. But we brought through a few good players. You know, the likes of Joe Tricarico,
He's the same age as me. I played against him as a junior. Always, everybody was here, and Joe was like at that level. So But he went on to play National League with Morwell. He spent some time with Morwell. So did he play for you and then go to Morwell?
Yes, I think it was 16 when he played for us. So, and that's what I'm saying. There were players in them days at a lot younger age that were getting thrown in the mix, and sometimes kids got thrown in who didn't succeed. But you either sink or swim. But they were getting the opportunities then in them days.
So walk me through some of the names that have played under you at, let's say, at an NPL level that have then gone out to play A-League afterwards. So give me some of the names. Have you helped, at some level develop or blossom?
I had Manny Muscat. I think he was captain for me at George Cross when he was 17. So that was, he was a good player, and had a great career over in Wellington.
And Melbourne City,
I had at Melbourne Knights. I had Ivan Franich, who I think was a winger, and I converted to a fullback, much to the dismay of his father, who thought I was a absolute prat for doing so. But I think he played in the World Cup as a fullback, so maybe I got that one right,
Yes, I think you did. Yeah. So he also ended up getting an Asian when Australia won the Asian Confederation or Cup, whatever. So he was part of that squad. Yeah. So also went on to represent the Socceroos and big A-League career in numerous clubs.
But look, I think there's a number. Cameron Watson's another one. I think played at Adelaide. So. Fairly big and substantial list, but I think that's what the game's about. Giving them the opportunity. That's where I don't see the NPL being used well enough to actually. You've got good players in the youth systems, but they tend to get kept in the youth system for way too long when they could be having that transition in the local leagues. And to be honest, I look at the golden generation, in Australia, and I think we had when Hiddink had the World Cup team.
2006, yeah.
I think we had 8 players from Victoria in that squad, and when you look at the likes of, other than Viduka, who was a freak for me, probably the best player that we've ever produced, but he come through the AIS under Ron Smith, and he was unbelievable. But all the other players, the other 7 players, the likes of Skoko, Bresciano, Grella, I don't know if Muscat was there, but they all played in the VPL. Whether the 17 or 18-year-olds that were their introduction to football. They all went on and did bigger and better things. Some of them played at Carlton, then went overseas and had great careers. But what I'm trying to say is they played men's football at an earlier age, and it was in that VPL, MPL system, which is still quite, I think it's a very good grounding for players. Technically at times it can be lacking, but you're up with a different thing week in, week out. So one week the ground might be a poor ground, or it might be a carpet. The weather plays condition. It takes it. Some playing it. You have a windy day or a rainy day or a dry day. You have the referee that might influence the game. And then you have the team you're playing against, and some teams can be more physical, some teams can play football. So I think all in all, it's a very good grounding for young players, which where I'm a little bit at a loss with the system at the moment. We've got a very good A-League system working, but we kind of stagnate and stockpile young players for a period of time without having progression for them. Now, some of the players are going to be great players and, play for the Joeys and then the young Socceroos, and they're already in the pathway. But there's a lot of those players that actually miss out. I had the likes of Matty Miller play for me at South Melbourne. He got released by Melbourne City, come to South Melbourne, had 3-4 years there, back in the A-League and playing in the A-League now. But what I'm saying, sometimes players get lost to the system. And I think trying to get them into a men's football a little bit earlier, even at a lesser level. You look at some of your best players overseas. I know Beckham under Ferguson got, I think it was Preston or someone like that. He got a loan move for a year just to actually go through the rough and tumble of what men's football is about, because it's not always about scoring glamorous goals and having great passages of play where you had 23 passes, to score a goal. Sometimes it's about those little things: when to foul a player, how to foul a player, when to slow the game down, when to speed the game up. They're fundamentals or basics of the game that an older and more experienced player knows, but the young players need to understand that. And that's part of the game that I think we do lack a little bit. And, there's only so many players can play. And I think the other unfortunate part for me, if I'm being honest, the A-League has 5 visa players. So technically your visa players are your best players. So if all 5 visa players are playing,
it's half the squad.
Well, it's half your team. So you got a goalkeeper and you got 10 outfield players. If 5 of them are visa players, technically half the players playing in the A-League, 60 players playing, and where's the rest of them go? So
the other thing too is like you have a look at let's say Melbourne City, who's sitting at the top at the moment. We're recording this in the late October 2020. They've got pretty much all of their international players have gotten international caps, right? So a young boy is competing against somebody who's played for their country at some point in their career. It's a big ask. So I'd question that too. And there's sometimes these clubs fill up visa players for the sake of just filling a spot, and
well, it's not just that. I think the other thing I take, we're all being told that we need to start developing younger players and bring them through the system and groom them in the system. But the flavour of the month is to bring out a 38, 39-year-old who's got a big name, but really is at the end of his career and his legs are going. And that's taking the spot off a young kid. So I think we contradict ourselves in the way that we go about things. What I'd like to see coaches like myself at NPL level get better access to younger players. And if I think they'd be far better off playing for Oakley, an 18-year-old boy, than playing NPL 3 for a Melbourne Victory or a Melbourne City.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's where we don't quite have it right, and maybe there needs to be loan agreements and there needs to be players that move in and out. But, we're doing a disservice to some of the younger players. We've produced great young players for so many years, but the system at the moment is neglecting it. We lose in the NPL system, we lose our best players at 13, 14, 15, 16, right the way through. And they get spat out at 21, 22 with no senior experience.
Yes.
And we're looking at them saying, well, he's got to be recoached because there's fundamentals of the game that he's actually lacking,
It's interesting that you say that, because a couple of those A-League clubs have just been promoted to the division under yours, but for many years they were playing 2 levels below you, right? And the difference between NPL 1 and NPL 3 is a big difference, right? Yep. It's got to be 30%, has to be, right? Yep. On any given day, Oakley's beating any one of the NPL 3 sides 2-3-0, right? So really interesting thing. So like a handshake agreement. Listen, son, you're now 17. You've been part of that, like that City, Victory, Western United now A-League side. Come for me for a year and I'll give you straight back, right? And you might get 10, 15 games with me, right? But you'll be playing against the best Victorian players. Interesting concept. I think there's a lot of merit to that. The talking about the difference between A-League and NPL, you went on a bit of a run in the last few months, right? Beating, having to play a couple of A-League sides. Sometimes you were successful, like the game against Sydney, and sometimes not so successful, that game against MacArthur. But the what's it like that run of the cup, where you're starting off playing, I don't know, whoever you're playing, Division 3 side, and then all the way to playing an A-League side. There's something special about that.
Yeah, I think that's what cup games are about. I've grown up watching the FA Cup, and that goes from the lower levels, qualifying rounds, and then goes, round 1, round 2, and then the big teams come in round 3. So there's a lot of flavour in it. Everyone in the country knows about it, and I think the conception of the FFA Cup, which is now the Australia Cup, has been great for club sides. You're involved at some stage throughout the process. Even some of the lesser clubs, might get to progress 3 or 4 rounds into the system and play an NPL team, which is good for them. So I think it has the flavour there. Certainly this year has been great for us. We've had players that, it actually makes players believe that they could possibly have the chance of going back and playing, A-League at some stage. Mm. So, playing, I said it to our club, beating Sydney in the quarterfinals of the Australia Cup probably won't sink in at the moment. But in 20 years' time, you'll be talking about that, not about the championship we won this year. Because I think it was, a big line in the sand and something our club can be very, very proud of.
Like lining up, let's say, for example, lining up to play against South Melbourne or playing a Sydney, do you change any of your course during the week or your tactics? Talk to me about that.
No, look, I think, and that's probably where, I always coach at the level we're at. I think we spoke about it the other day. I don't want to play like Barcelona because I haven't got the players to play like Barcelona. So I have to cope with the fact of the level we're at, which is semi-pro. And we work with player strengths and not their weaknesses. I don't want to try and change things to make them play a different way to what they're capable of doing. And it's the same when you go through and you play different. I'm more worried about my team. I know what we can do and I know what our strengths are and I know what our weaknesses are. So we want to bring our strengths to the table and try and minimise what we do with our weaknesses. And it's the same when we play, maybe the way the Australia Cup works, the A-League clubs are at a disadvantage in the earlier rounds. And as the competition progresses, they get stronger because they get fitter.
Yeah.
So you've got to put up with all those things. We know that you play an A-League team, that they'd be expected to have more possession than you. So, we have to work around that. We know we're a good side. And I always work to like what our strengths are. I'm not going to focus on what the other team can do. So going into those games, we were very, very confident. Playing MacArthur, I think had we not played them 2 days after a grand final, we possibly would have had a better opportunity.
Okay. So you think you were fatigued a little bit?
Not fatigued. I think it was just getting up for 2 big games in such a short space of time, and then the grand final was 3 weeks afterwards. I question why you have to have it 2 days after a grand final. But by the same token, they're a good side. They've got good players. Their front three are phenomenal. But losing Aaron Williams when we were 1-0 up 5 minutes before half time. So we were well and truly in the game. But, that loss kind of put a bit of an end to it for us. But we were proud of what we did. And, It was good for Victorian football as far as we were concerned.
Brilliant for Victorian football. So one question that I'm keen to ask, you get a lot of players that have been cut from maybe not that year, but like a couple of years before. So they're professional,
Yep.
and then they move to be semi-pro. And so I'm guessing you need to reconstruct their mental fortitude or capability or mindset. Walk me through scenarios that you help build a player back up to in order to perform for you. Maybe they've been shattered because they feel like they've had their career cut short.
Look, I think it's a hard one. I mean, mental resilience, it comes from within, so that's up to the individual. I think what we do is try and cater for what we've got, and we are a semi-pro side. I tend to look at a day on, day off. That's the way semi-pro works, which is totally different to a full-time environment where you're in every day. You probably don't have to train as hard, but fitness-wise, you'll be a lot fitter. We can't focus on having heaps of recovery sessions or having video analysis because, sometimes I have two sessions a week to actually get my team right.
Okay.
So we've got to put things in perspective, and then there's a different side to it. I've got the guy that might be getting up at 6 a.m. laying bricks.
Yeah.
How do I get him, doing time trials at night because I don't think he's fit enough? So they're all the combinations that you have to work with. So we're working with players whose lifestyle is a bit different. You mentioned Wade Decker earlier on. Wade was at Melbourne City, school teacher now. He works every day and then has to come training at night. So I think the vast thing for me is, we spoke about it right at the start of the conversation, why you're involved in football, and it's all about the enjoyment. And what you're trying to do with players at our level, even if they have had come out the higher level, you want them to enjoy what they're doing. If they're enjoying it, then, my dressing room's massive. We look at it being like a bit of a haven for everyone that, it's good times in there. Everyone enjoys what they're doing. Everyone enjoys each other's company. So if they're turning up to a session and enjoying what they're doing, that reflects on the park as well.
Oh, brilliant! So you're touching on your philosophy there. How would you characterize yourself as a? So I'll reframe that question. How do you think your players would characterize you as a coach?
Well, I'm pretty quiet. I'm not the one that screams and yells. I do get carried away now and again, but I've tended to tone that down. I always like to be in control of the situation. So I think what is coaching? I think at times people overcoach. And what do I mean by that? You need to coach and you need to give everyone a bit of a system. But I tend to work with my player strengths and not focus on the weaknesses. But it's a man management system. As on a building site, I manage people. And you do the same. And it's not always the players. Sometimes it's the supporters. Sometimes it's the committees. Sometimes it's the money men. You're actually trying to create harmony. And if there's going to be an issue, I tend to like to know about it before it happens. So you're very aware of what's going on, and hopefully in control of the situation. And I think my strength at the moment is I've coached some clubs that have been battling clubs, where you work in, week out, and you might lose 4 games on the trot. What do you do in the 5th game? And because I've been through all that, that puts me in quite a good stead with my experience. And that's where I think sometimes you get coaches come through and we've got all these philosophies, but when things don't go to plan, how do you put that right? And sometimes it's not a case of changing too much, but it's about believing in what you're doing, and just having a slight tweak to actually get that result back again and get everyone believing in your philosophy.
Yeah. Very, very, very pertinent point for all those coaches listening out there. So, over the course of your time, you've seen a lot of players come through. Let's say you had to give advice to that player wanting to transition, that advice. There's no one better than you to give your perspective on football to that young male or female, looking to break into first grade football? What advice do you have for those players listening?
Look, I always tend to reflect back on, look, football for me is quite a basic game. There's certain fundamentals that you can do, and I say it to my players each week. We know that everyone's got strengths, and good abilities. Someone might be very quick, can beat players. Someone might be a good dribbler, and get them on the ball, and they're very good. But the only, in each week that might be different. You might have a great touch one week. It might not be as good the next. But there's only one basic or given factor, and that's your effort. And if everyone, and that's what I tend to find now, I think players come in and want to be technically good. But the fundamental thing is, if you watch some of the best sides around the world, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, the Man Cities, when they haven't got possession of the ball, they work very, very hard. So good players at the top level are not just good players. They're good players because they've got great work ethics. And I tend to think that's something that gets glossed over. It's almost like, well, he's not a good player because he has to just graft all the time. But that's the given that every player should have. And then the little things will come to the fore. So, you might be hitting a great free kick in the top corner, but you won't do it every week. And that's probably what makes you stand out. But the rest of it is all down to your effort. And I think sometimes we lose focus of that. Players want to go out there and be the man without, having a lot of work rate to actually achieve that.
Yeah, they show themselves when they're on the ball, as opposed to, like, what's that? 95% of the time you haven't got the ball and you're running, chase somebody else. Really, so focusing on that sort of hard running effort, being that focus a lot on that side of your game, and then so when you've got the ball, if I have to paraphrase, so when you've got the ball, then you can show yourself. Yeah,
exactly. Because not everyone's on all the time. So it's your other contribution. And sometimes if you're working on, you come off the park and you know that you're giving your best, that gives you the confidence to keep going out and doing it. I always look at the best players going around. I always think they've got great work ethics.
Fantastic words of wisdom, Chris Taylor. You've been a steward of football here in Victoria, particularly from a coaching level. You've coached so many great sides. We wish you all the very best in your endeavours and your continued contribution. Thank you, and we remember back of your time at Sunshine City and George Cross in both the state and national leagues. So thank you for your continued contribution to Australian football.
Thanks very much. Thanks for your time.
Hey guys, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to our wonderful guest. If you like this type of content and would like to see more, how about you hit the like and subscribe button? And have a fantastic day.